Well, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are across Canada and maybe beyond. It's wonderful that you've been able to join this first webinar in the Canadian Colleges for Resilient Recovery series of webinars, which will be running for the next few months. My name is David Wheeler, and I'm an academic and a practitioner in sustainability. I've been in those roles for more years than I care to think about. But I am exquisitely excited to be involved with Canadian Colleges for Resilient Recovery, which is a really important initiative for Canada. Indeed, I believe a game changer for the skills agenda for a resilient recovery. C2R2, as we call it for short, Canadian Colleges for Resilient Recovery, is a coalition of leading colleges, CEGEPs, polytechnics and institutes across Canada who are known for their commitment to sustainability, who came together about 7-8 months ago to advocate for and practice what a resilient recovery may look like in Canada, and in particular to focus on the skills that will be needed to deliver a more sustainable, more resilient recovery in years to come. So these are already leading institutions, already with a great reputation, and they're present in every jurisdiction across the country, I'm pleased to say. So there'll be a focus on training and education, but also in research and development and in demonstration projects. And if you want to know more about C2R2, you're invited to go to the website, which is www.resilientcolleges.ca, and you can find out all about the coalition and what we're trying to do. Today's seminar is hosted by Red River College in Manitoba, and I'm delighted to say that Red River College also is a national leader in sustainability and has special expertise in the topic for today, which is powering the transition to zero emissions vehicles. Red River College is based on the unceded territories, the original lands of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Oji Cree, Dakota and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And of course, wherever you are in Canada today, you will also be very conscious of your presence on unceded territories wherever you are. And I think it's really important for C2R2 and indeed probably for every participant in this webinar that we recognise the importance of Indigenous inclusion in everything we do, especially in building back better, especially in delivering a really sustainable and resilient and socially inclusive Canada in years to come. In that vein, I also wanted to note that for C2R2 founding partners, it's all about our students, it's all about our future generation of leaders who are going to drive the resilient recovery, not just in the next few years, but beyond. If we get a truly sustainable, resilient and inclusive Canada out of this terrible tragedy of the pandemic, we will at least be rescuing some good from some very, very tragic circumstances. And we wanted to highlight just one student, just to make the point really on behalf of Red River College and Coalition, that as we do our work and as we think about a resilient recovery, we do need to think about the individuals that can shine in the resilient recovery. And here we're spotlighting just one amazing individual, who is Ernestine Ledoux. And Ernestine, as you can see there, is currently taking social innovation and community development at Red River College. She's a strong advocate for the environment, and after graduation, her goal is to develop greenhouses in northern Manitoba and raise awareness about the effects of climate change. And Ernestine is going to be one of those leaders in her community who will make a real difference, and it is our pleasure and our privilege to support students like Ernestine in her studies and in her future career. So again, wanted to emphasize the importance of individuals and their ability to make a difference in everything that C2R2 does. And I'm sure all of our panelists will be reflecting on the importance of supporting students like Ernestine and the many, many other students who will be driving Canada forwards in this resilient recovery. So let me now quickly move to our panelists. If we could bring that slide back up. And I am absolutely over the moon to introduce what is an incredibly powerful panel for this webinar. We have Jojo Delos Reyes from Red River College, who's the research program manager at Red River College, and very much involved in the zero emissions vehicles work that Red River College is doing. We have the very well-known Jim Stanford, who's director of the Centre for Future Work, and those of you that have followed Jim's work over the years with the labour movement and beyond will know that he is one of Canada's leading economists, and we very much look forward to Jim's contribution on the panel. We have Clara Clairman, who has a very interesting background in the corporate sector. For many years was with OPG and therefore knows the power industry extremely well. But in recent years, Clara has set herself free from the corporate world and has become one of the leading advocates for electric vehicles, not just in Ontario, but nationally and internationally. And so Clara will be explaining more about her work on the panel. And John DeBoer. John brings a very, very welcome private sector perspective to this panel. And he's head of Siemens Future Grid and eMobility Solutions. Siemens is one of those very, very progressive companies that is leading the way, really, with just a handful of others internationally on pursuing zero emissions as a corporation, not just in 2050, which is an easy thing to promise, but much earlier. So we should recognise Siemens and John's role for Siemens in Canada. So welcome to all of our panelists, and we are going to, I think, have a range of very, very powerful inputs from all of our panelists. But it's my job to get us to the panel discussion efficiently as well. And so the panel's contributions will be relatively brief, around 10, 12 minutes in each case. And then we'll move as promptly as we can to the interactive part of the event, where participants in the audience can also fire in their questions via the Q&A function. The chat function is actually disabled for today, so use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. And if you have questions for any of the panelists, then please enter them in the Q&A function as the panelist is speaking, and we'll try and pick all of those up during the interactive panel discussion, which will start in about an hour's time. I should also mention that we have sign language support from colleagues at Red River College today, and you can probably see Mandy there. I don't know how that works on your screens, but she's just next to me on my screen. So Mandy, thank you very much for offering to provide the sign language support for today. That's really important. Again, signals our commitment, I hope, to inclusivity during these events, and indeed everything that C2R2 does. So with that, I think there's probably no more introduction required, other than to say that the topic for today could not be more important. As we all know, transportation is a major source of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. And of course, that links to our lifestyle, it links to our culture, our dependency on automobiles. And whilst that might have driven the economy in the 20th century, there will have to be big changes to vehicular transportation and indeed all other aspects of transportation in coming years if we're going to bear down on the emissions across Canada, and particularly this very, very important source of emissions for our country. We know how much trucking goes on in Canada. We know how many people own private vehicles, and a lot of those vehicles will need to be retired sooner rather than later. Some major public policy and financing questions embedded there. So this could not be a more important topic, and I'm delighted that it is the inaugural topic for our webinar series from C2R2. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Jojo, who's going to share with us some of the work he does, and perhaps also introduce himself and his role at Red River College. So Jojo, over to you.
So thanks again and welcome everyone. I've been, as David mentioned, I'm Jojo Delos Reyes. I'm a research program manager at Red River College, and I've been with the college for more than 10 years now. I started as a researcher and have been involved in different sustainable research, including electric vehicles. Now I lead a small team who are continuing the work related to EVs. So next slide, please. So Red River College is one of the founding partners of Canadian Colleges for Resilient Recovery. And we are proud to be joined by our partners from across the country. Could you move to the next slide, please? Red River College is Manitoba's largest institute of applied learning and research, and the only polytechnic in the province. The college applied research model can be best described as developing and implementing innovative solutions to real-world challenges. The approach is more on answering the hows instead of the whys. And if you're familiar with technology readiness levels, colleges tend to work on level 4 and upwards. As a polytechnic, our programs encourage learning by doing, developing the practical skills and competencies required in today's workplaces, and giving our graduates a leg up in the labor market. Our students work with local, national, and international firms to solve technology-related challenges while building innovation-enabling skills through participation in applied research. For more than a decade now, Red River College has been involved in advanced transportation-related research and demonstration initiatives that support zero-emission vehicles. Next slide, please. Another click. It is helpful to go back to 2010 when the Electric Vehicle Technology Roadmap for Canada was released through Natural Resources Canada. The roadmap includes an ambitious goal of 500,000 light-duty EVs on the road by 2018. Obviously, this goal was not met, but we have made significant progress. Embedded in the roadmap are Canadians' perceptions of EVs, and the main concern back then are the effective range and the battery and charging concerns. We will revisit this page again after a couple of slides. Next slide, please. Understanding the effective range and operational aspects of an EV has been the main focus of the Electric Vehicle Technology and Education Center, or EVTech. Established in 2011 at Red River College with funding support from the Manitoba province, the mission of EVTech is to support innovation, enhance education, and increase public awareness of electric vehicle technology. At that time, ORC had full access to an early version of a Mitsubishi iMev. We also had limited access to a Nissan Leaf and a Chevrolet Volt, which is a plug-in hybrid EV. The multi-year operational testing enabled us to establish what we call now the EVTech model. Please click. The model shows the minimum effective driving range from -20 degrees C and below, and the linearly varying range as ambient temperature goes up, similar to the performance curve from Geotab. One key experiment performed on both iMev and Leaf was the drive to depletion experiment. The question that we're trying to answer was, at zero state of charge, can the vehicle still run, and for how long? We have proven that it still can for a few kilometers, which is essential to know as you look for the nearest charging station. Next slide, please. The full report can be accessed through our website. So if you have some time, please go to our website and read through the report. Next slide, please. Another operational aspect is access to charging stations with support from the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council Red River College established the first Level 3 fast charger in the province in 2015, with the intent of understanding the impact on the grid as well as cold weather operation. One of our student-supported project is to enable Level 1 charging. It may sound easy, but the way our powered parking stalls are configured created a welcome challenge to our student team before Level 1 charging was enabled on campus. The goal of this project is to showcase a potential low-cost solution for workplace charging. Now let's go back to the roadmap. Next slide, please. The roadmap was timely and is still a good reference as we push for more light-duty EVs in Canada. But something is missing. Please click. The document does not include the roadmap for heavy vehicles. Next slide, please. Under the radar, Canada and Canadian companies have emerged as leaders in heavy vehicle electrification. Over the last 5 years, that leadership is evident across the country. To name a few, New Flyer and Nova Bus had their electric transit bus offerings. Lion Electric with its electric school buses, and recently launched their electric Class 8 trucks. Dana TM4 is leading the way in its electric motors and electric drive systems, and Ballard is leading the way in fuel cell technology. Next slide, please. The electrification of heavy-duty vehicles and alternative fuel technologies represent an important area where Canadian colleges can make a big difference. Colleges can support applied research initiatives, demonstration and testing, and lastly, training and workforce development. Although Red River College certainly has been involved with light-duty electric and other vehicles, an essential aspect of our focus today has been on heavy-duty applications. Next slide, please. In 2005 and 2006, Red River's involvement with heavy-duty alternative vehicle activities strongly began by providing refueling stations and operational assistance for two major hydrogen-related bus demonstrations: winter testing of the hydrogen hybrid internal combustion engine, transit bus, and the hybrid fuel cell bus demonstration. Next slide, please. Starting in 2011, the college played a vital role in the prototype electric bus project. The college also supported the follow-up en route pilot of 4 second-generation electric buses starting in 2014 with Winnipeg Transit. So for 4 buses, used the RRC design or redesigned battery packs from an international partner, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. Next slide, please. This slide just shows one of the 4 second-generation electric buses in operation in Winnipeg. Our involvement in the electric bus demonstration project paved the way to a follow-on project related to the second life application of used batteries. For motive applications, EVs would typically replace batteries when the battery state of health reaches 80%. State of health is a measurement that reflects the general condition of a battery and its ability to deliver the specified performance compared with a fresh battery. We are currently working on a project to reconfigure older bus batteries into something similar to the e-Carrier battery-based charging station shown on the slide. We hope that once we prove the viability of repurposing used batteries, it will create opportunities for a low-carbon, low-cost energy storage option, especially if coupled with solar or wind energy as an alternative to diesel generators in remote communities. Next slide, please. Manitoba has the biggest cluster of heavy vehicle manufacturing, and Red River College is prepared to support the heavy vehicle industry. Our Yon Denoudston Vehicle Technology and Research Center is where our new important asset is located, Motive Lab. Next slide, please. A big thanks to our funders, Western Diversification, Canada Foundation for Innovation, and the Strategic Infrastructure Fund from ISED. Motive Lab is a 7,000 square feet climatic chamber with an integrated dynamometer testing facility. The facility can accommodate large vehicles, for example, a 40-foot bus or a Class 8 truck. The chamber can be set from -40 degrees C to +50 C and can maintain its setting within plus or minus 1 degree C. It is essentially a freezer with a treadmill in it. The integrated 3-axle chassis dynamometer with regenerative AC motors allows for fast response time and can simulate different charge topologies, ground topologies, I mean. It means we can simulate a vehicle driving uphill or different road terrains, ideal for EV testing again. It is worth mentioning that a 150 kilowatt DC fast charger from Siemens will be installed just outside the chamber within the next couple of months. Heavy-duty EVs that are being tested inside the chamber can be charged inside via pass-through access. Next slide, please. The slide shows a Class A truck being tested inside Motive Lab during the commissioning of the facility. Next slide, please. And in closing, there are many opportunities available in heavy vehicle electrification that are extremely important for Canada. Colleges can play a significant role, primarily through ongoing training. It is worth mentioning that next week, RRC will be rolling out an eBus basic training program developed for Winnipeg Transit staff. The goal is to bridge the knowledge gap and provide the necessary foundational skills to existing staff for maintaining the electric bus. And finally, our focus is on applied research and practical implementation that are critical if electrification efforts are to succeed within Canada. It takes much hard work, and colleges are positioned to help make it happen. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jojo. That was a real tour de force of the background to your work and the very exciting things that are happening at Red River College. And you referenced there the importance of training. And of course, one of the great things that C2R2 can do is take the amazing training that you guys are going to develop for this burgeoning new technology and new industry, and then share that across the country very, very quickly. So that's part of the beauty of the model I think we're building, and it's great to have Red River College at the heart of that, because for sure there's going to be a lot of vehicle technician and other forms of training required that will look somewhat different to the vehicle technician training of the past. So wonderful that you're spearheading that, not just in Manitoba, but for the country. And I'm sure maybe people pick up on it beyond Canada as well. So thank you for that. If participants have questions for Jojo, again, I'll remind you to put them in the Q&A function while they're still fresh in your mind, so that we can recycle them later in the session. So thanks again, Jojo. So at this point, I'd like to move on to John DeBoer. And John, as I mentioned, is head of Siemens Future Grid and eMobility Solutions. And we very much look forward, John, to your remarks.
First, I want to say thank you so much for having me here today. I know as Siemens, we're quite impressed by the efforts that are being undertaken both at Red River College and across Canada to lead the charge for electrified transport. You know, I will fully acknowledge that a change of this scale is difficult, and it requires industries that have existed for over 100 years to evolve. And a key facet of that is the people, it is the training, it is the technologies, all coming together in a way that's exciting for customers, exciting for citizens, and forms great and modern cities. So maybe just to share briefly about when we talk about electrifying transport, what sort of scale are we talking about? And it's changing everything. It's changing public transportation. It's changing the fueling stations and pumps that we've been used to for the better part of 100 years. It's changing workplaces. It's changing factories. It's changing plazas. It's the change of logistics centers and parking garages and public transportation so that there is a social equity associated with this movement. But when we as Siemens look at electrifying transport, what we see is that all of these elements are ultimately necessary for the success. And I would reemphasize the comments from Jojo that Canada is an amazing leader in the electrification of the bus movement. I think the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, with the $1.5 billion and the 5,000 buses that are planned, sends a tremendous market signal towards the future of this change. And I can say as Siemens, we are also very hungry as a customer to change our company. We have a personal goal that by 2030, we will be net carbon neutral. And I'm proud to say that as of 2021, we're over halfway to that journey. But as we look over our next decade and really achieving the result for a large multinational company, electrifying transport is one of our own internal barriers, because what we see is this entire ecosystem has to change. So I'm really excited to be a part of this panel today. I hope over the next few slides I can share maybe a few of the challenges that are ahead of us. And it's not to scare, but it's rather to say how important initiatives such as the activities that are happening at River College and ultimately throughout Canada are to our mutual long-term success.
John, it's David here. I just wanted to let you know that your sound is coming in and out a little, which may be because you have another device that's absorbing or distracting.
I'll see what I can do about it. Sorry about that.
That's all right. Maybe just stay as close to the mic and as still as you can to not fade in and out. Thank you, John.
Will do, absolutely. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
excellent. So, the first thing I want to reflect on as we begin to electrify transport is that there is a very well-established system, but that system is predominantly associated with the vehicle. So when we oftentimes picture electrifying transport, we talk about the car, we talk about the truck, we talk about the van, we talk about the bus. These are the things that oftentimes come to our mind. But when we really start to look at the new world, what we see is that there is a new infrastructure that is critical for the success. We start to talk about how do we work with electric utilities for supplying the power, and how do we ensure that that power is resilient with the right microgrid and islanding approaches. We start to see that the charging infrastructure, the chargers themselves, become a critical facet of delivering and ensuring reliable service. And as importantly, we start to talk about the people. And we realize that reskilling a new generation of workforce, both to run the vehicles, but also to manage this new critical infrastructure, is of utmost importance. And then finally, we look at the business models where we recognize that there are changes in policy that are necessary, that there are new provisions that must be made for delivering this complete ecosystem so that our society can continue to deliver both people and goods in the most effective way possible. So for the purposes of today, I'd like to just briefly highlight some of the challenges that are associated with infrastructure and training and the exciting things that are coming here at Red River College. So the first is on the technologies. And I think, when we start to talk about electrifying cars, vans, buses, and trucks, we have to recognize that there is an entire suite of charging technologies that are necessary to accomplish this goal. And the most visible part of that is the chargers themselves. And so they'll range, from small chargers like you see on the left-hand side that can fit, in the palm of your hand, all the way through the infrastructure for charging buses, like what we're doing at Red River College, where these equipments will weigh several thousand pounds and are a key piece of city infrastructure. They're a key facet of urban planning in many respects, and they're a new form of critical infrastructure. But we go beyond the chargers. What we actually tend to see as we transition from a parking lot and fuel pumps to an electrified future is a conversion that in Siemens we like to refer to as plug to grid. The complete transition of the supply for these new vehicles. And it gets into the charging stations. It gets into a whole array of infrastructure devices that we oftentimes in the industry refer to the make-ready equipment or the low and medium voltage electrical equipment. We get into battery storage and the ways that we ensure that these new pockets are resilient and available. And incredibly importantly, we get into how this fits into an amazing and diverse electric utility infrastructure that ultimately powers our homes, our businesses, and our lives. And so when we talk about success and really bringing at scale the electrification of transport, it's important that we look at this entire conversion of infrastructure and all of these pieces. And we recognize that behind the scenes, there are new skills that are required, both in the technologies, in the design principles and how we build and construct, in the amazingly diverse and critical software and applications that are associated with running this new ecosystem. And lest it be forgotten in the service, because what we find is that the need for cities as they go through this transition is to have a new, great, and modern workforce that is capable of keeping this equipment uptime and available 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. So I'm really eager to get into the panel discussions later, but I first have to acknowledge and highlight Red River College. You know, I can say on behalf of Siemens, we're excited to work together to go through factors such as future environmental testing, interoperability testing, looking at the evolution of firmware and software, using this as a highlight for the amazing power of Canada as a leader in the electrification of transport. And for me, from a most passionate perspective, developing the next generation workforce. Because when we take examples like the Canada Infrastructure Bank and the $1.5 billion that's planned for the buses, what we quickly see is that there are over 5,000 new drivers that will need to be trained, retrained, or positioned for their roles, and over 500 new individuals that will have to work in over 200 cities to support that infrastructure. So I'm excited to see what will come from the programs here, and I look forward to the journey that we're heading on together. So thank you so much.
Thank you, John. And again, a big thank you for reinforcing the importance of training and the relationship you have with Red River College, which indeed is pretty special. I did want to again emphasize for our participants what a big deal it is that Siemens has this 2030 goal and that is driving the entire strategy of the organization. There is literally just a handful of major corporations around the world that share Siemens' ambitions in that regard. And so it's a real pleasure to be able to reinforce John's message and to recognize and acknowledge the importance of the strategic leadership that Siemens are showing both in Canada and globally. It really is a very big deal. So thank you for that, John, and for your remarks. And now I'm delighted to introduce Clara Clairman. As I mentioned before, has a glittering career in the corporate sector as well, with a power utility, but is now absolutely driving the agenda around the uptake of electric vehicles in Ontario and Canada generally. So, Cara, great that you could join us today, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here. Pleased to be here and to talk to you a little bit about plug and drive and about resilient recovery and the role of colleges. So thanks so much for those earlier remarks from Jojo and from John. Really amazing to see what's happening at Red River College and hopefully at all the colleges across Canada. I'm gonna step back just for a moment to make sure that this point doesn't get missed. It's sort of assumed, I think, and is underlying a lot of why we're even talking about EVs at all. But not everybody knows it, which is, I think, David, you alluded to transportation as a large emitting sector, but I think people sometimes don't realize that transportation is actually the largest emitting sector in many jurisdictions. This is numbers from Ontario, but everywhere in Canada, transportation is number 1 or number 2. And so we really can't hit our climate goals at all if we don't tackle transportation. Certainly Canada can't come anywhere close to its climate goal that it's set for Paris Accord if it doesn't tackle transportation. So that's why initiatives like you're hearing about from Jojo and John are so important, that we speed it up, and not just that we, let the market sort of happen on its own, but we have to do things to speed that transition up. And I think another real advantage we have in Canada is, we already have a relatively clean electricity grid. This again is Ontario, where we have, mostly nuclear and hydro on the grid with a small amount of renewables, a little bit of natural gas running at the peak. Then you take Manitoba, British Columbia, Quebec, almost entirely hydroelectric. And so across Canada, about 80% of the grid is low to no emitting. And so we have this huge advantage where if we're going to plug in electric vehicles, may they be cars, buses, trucks, we're going to be plugging into very low emitting electricity and dropping those greenhouse gas emissions in many jurisdictions by as much as 90% or more. So this is the reason that so many of us are working on this issue, and why it's so important. And take Ontario as an example with electric vehicles. It's such a perfect fit with electric cars because most people are going to plug those cars in at night. And at night, in most jurisdictions, the electricity is actually even cleaner than it is in the day, because you're running base load electricity. Typically fossil fuels are peaking operations, and they run more at peak times and less at night. So for all these reasons, just makes so much sense for us for Canada to be a leader and to move quickly to electrify its transportation fleet in all areas. And it's interesting because I've been at this for about 10 years, and we talk a lot about the environmental message, but there are a lot of other reasons that EVs make sense. Certainly, it's exciting to be in a position to be able to say, like, we've got loads of makes and models to choose from these days. We're up to about 40 plus now, and all predictions will say that Canada will have as many as 100 by the end of 2022 if all the models that have been announced, come to pass. And so this issue of there isn't one I like, or I'm waiting for the truck or the SUV or whatever, these are issues we used to hear about. Those issues are pretty much in the rearview mirror. And same with range. We used to get a lot of people talking about range anxiety, concerns around range. You still hear it, but the reality is this issue is going away because of the infrastructure build out that we're seeing, because the battery ranges are improving and the efficiencies are improving. You've got many makes and models with 300 plus kilometers of range, many with 400 or more. So that issue is going away. And finally, I talked about the environmental benefit, the economic benefit is there as well. And there's the personal economic benefit. In every part of Canada, electricity is much cheaper than gas. It's about 1/4 here in Ontario. In Manitoba, it's even better. It's about 1/6 or 1/7 even, depending on the price of gas. And same for Quebec. So we have a huge opportunity actually to save money. And the reality is Canadians, once they realize that they're going to save, are going to switch en masse. And this is a message that we really have to help get out to the consumer, because they see that sticker price, the vehicles cost a little bit more, and it's really tough to persuade people, pay now to save later. But we have to help them with that. We have to help them understand the benefit of that. And we need some of the banks to step up and offer really innovative financing to kind of show that upfront savings, so that people aren't sort of feeling the pinch up front. because that difference in sticker price is still persuading people to say, not this time, the next vehicle. And if they do that, you lose them for as much as 7 years. And we don't have time for that. Climate change is urgent. 7 years from now, we're kind of past the point of no return. So we want people who are looking for a car today to be the ones to say, no, this makes sense for me, and we need to help them with that. I'm not going to spend time on Plug and Drive. We're mostly about outreach and consumer awareness. We do a bunch of other things in terms of research and policy work, but check us out on the web if you're interested. The one thing I will say is we do have our EV Discovery Center, which is a bricks and mortar science center meets car showroom in the city of Toronto. If you are in Toronto at some point, probably not right now because we're in lockdown, but maybe in a month, please come and visit us. Super fun place to test drive all the makes and models with no pressure to buy anything. People love it. We've been running there for 4 years, and the crowd still comes. So please visit us if you can. That's just another view. We launched this spring a mobile unit talking about resilient recovery, because what we realized is not everybody's in striking distance of the greater Toronto area. We actually know Toronto's not the center of the universe. And so we built a mobile EV Discovery Center on wheels that we can take to different communities. We spent 2 months in Ottawa in the fall. You can see it's open to the air, so perfect for COVID times. We're heading out to BC in the spring, COVID permitting, and we'll travel across Canada from there. So hopefully we'll be in a town near you sometime soon. We love to visit college and university campuses because we want those folks to never drive a gas car, and they don't have to. I got university age kids, and they've actually never driven a gas car, so it's all possible. Visit us if we're in your neighborhood. In terms of helping consumers and the resilient recovery, one of the things that we're working on is helping consumers get into used EVs. And this is really, really important, because what we found in our survey work is that lots of people love the idea of an EV, but they think they're just too expensive. And in fact, being too expensive was the #1 issue people raised, more than range, more than makes and models, more than anything, about the reason that they're not choosing an EV. And so we were fortunate to partner with a family foundation, the Brigham Foundation, to be able to bring forward a rebate on used EVs. And this is really helping the middle class get into EVs, folks who thought they couldn't afford one. Used EVs are really affordable. And this is an opportunity for people to get one. And most people have sort of, I would say the #1 benefit of offering $1,000 is not even the $1,000, but is the awareness raising, where people went, oh, I didn't realize I could get a used EV. And because people think they're too new, but there are actually a lot of used EVs available. So anyway, if you've been thinking about an EV and thinking you couldn't do it, used makes that possible. And BC and Quebec also have used EV rebates available. We've been lobbying the feds to make it national. It was in the mandate letter, but there's a budget coming up, so maybe, fingers crossed, let's see. We also sell home chargers on our site just to help people get a home charger, including your Siemens VersaCharge is on there, and every other make and model that you can think of. We don't make money doing this stuff. We do it because people don't know what to do, and we don't want this to be another reason they say no. It's a pretty exciting time in electric cars. If for those of us who've been at it for a while, it's exciting now to be like on the growth curve. I think for a while it was hard for those of us in this space. They're toiling away, and people thought it wouldn't happen. We're past 7 million cars worldwide. A lot of those are in China, but growing worldwide, which is exciting to see. And the latest numbers are just more reason to be optimistic. We see 500 makes and models worldwide by the end of 2022. That's just like a year and a half away. So incredible, and investments in every country, billions and billions of dollars of investment. So, this isn't an if, is going to happen. It's just a when, and we're just trying to speed that up. Look, I have no crystal ball, but some folks, Bloomberg in particular, are predicting even by 2030, we're at 7 million now, we'll be at about 26 million cars across the globe. Canada is at about 150,000 right now. There's no reason we shouldn't be at 1 million cars by then. So big goals, but it's possible with the growing models and makes that are available and the increasing supply. Right now, Canada's biggest problem is supply. It's hard to get an EV, even if you want one. They're just not plentiful. So you got to bug your local dealer to try to get a few on the lot. And I'd just like to close out with a little bit about COVID and how is that helping or hurting our resilient recovery. It looked initially like it was hurting. We did see a drop, for example, in the use of public chargers because people weren't driving as much. We did see a lull in sales, but the data is all pointing in the right direction, that everything is rebounding in terms of vehicle sales and use of public charging. Now, people are traveling less for sure, which of course makes sense during a pandemic, but the decrease in range of driving has also got people thinking, well, geez, I don't drive very far. Maybe an EV is totally fine for me. And I think the other thing we saw is when everyone stopped driving, we saw this incredible improvement in our air quality. If you live in a big city, you noticed it. And then we all thought, wow, we could have this great air quality all the time. We don't need to go back to that bad air quality, and we should be all moving to EV just for our own health. There's also a huge jobs opportunity. The Clean Energy Canada just put out a study. If you haven't seen it, you should go to their website. It's called the Fast Lane, predicting half of the EVs in Canada, about half of the vehicles sold in Canada will be EVs by 2030, and that the jobs right now are, in the low 200,000 for EV industries, that they'll more than double by 2030. So lots of career opportunities for new grads. So this is a field worth getting into and worth learning about. We're going to see at least a 28 to 30% growth in the sector every year from now till 2030. So interesting stats from Clean Energy Canada. And as I said, if you're keen to know more about the air pollution angle, we don't talk enough about the health impact of our cars. Clearingtheair.ca has a really great study showing that if we all switch to EVs in the Greater Toronto Area, we'd save hundreds of lives, reduce emissions, and save about $2 billion in social costs, including hospital visits, asthma attacks, medication, etc. So take a look at that if you're interested in the health angle, but we should all be concerned about that. And I wouldn't be in the not-for-profit game if I didn't thank my sponsors. Plug and Drive can't do what it does without the help of all its sponsors, and we really appreciate all their support, especially during these tough times. If there are students on this webinar, I hope you're thinking about EV as a future opportunity, career opportunity. We have 3 automakers here in Ontario who are converting their factory manufacturing facilities to EV manufacturing. GM, Ford, and Chrysler have all made commitments to make EVs here in Ontario. That's huge news for Canada. We're going to have a robust auto sector for years to come, and it's a great opportunity for students. And with countries banning gas cars and gas stations installing chargers right, left, and center, we know that this is going places. It's not turning back. So I'll leave it at that. I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you, Clara. As ever, your passion for your cause shines through.
Even on Zoom.
Especially on Zoom. And what also shines through, of course, is the absolute logic of the argument you're making. because it's very hard to argue with all those benefits, all those stats you've presented. And thank you again for circling back to the implications for our students. This is a great area for students to be pursuing. And I wanted to mention that one of the primary catalysts for the formation of C2R2 was the publication of the report of the Task Force for a Resilient Recovery. And of course, I'm sure you were consulted in that report, Clara, because they very pointedly identified kickstarting Canada's zero emissions vehicles sector as one of the 5 key areas for investment for Canada for the future. And so let us hope that that recommendation is more than fully taken account of in the forthcoming budget, and that all of the incentives and all of the support for the growth of the industry that you are advocating for comes through, because it clearly, as you said, is a major part of delivering on Canada's greenhouse gas emissions targets. So for now, Clara, thank you. And we will look forward to questions coming from our participants in the plenary in 10, 15 minutes. But meanwhile, I'm delighted to introduce again Jim Stanford, who I'm sure will be known to all of you as someone whose opinions are always taken seriously on the economy in Canada. And Jim is based in BC, so no doubt, Clara, you'll be seeing Jim at your launch of your advocacy in BC as Plug and Drive goes national. So Jim, as we mentioned earlier, is head of the Centre for the Future of Work, which is a really important role in terms of our agenda. And it's just a great pleasure to be able to welcome Jim to this seminar. Jim's not going to use slides, he's just going to talk from the head and from the heart. So Jim, over to you.
David, thank you very much, and the whole team at C2R2 for having me with this panel, and just for the incredible initiative of the Colleges for Resilient Recovery. I just think it's marvelous to see the colleges taking a proactive leadership role in this whole transition, and recognizing both the need of young workers in the future in Canada for training that can give them great jobs in a net zero economy, and the role of colleges in making that happen. So I'm just so thrilled with what you're doing. I have to confess, David, every time I hear C2R2, I immediately think of R2D2. I've actually brought along my friend with me to join the panel today. So if there are any technical questions about robots and intergalactic affairs, I'll consult with R2D2 here. And just thrilled to hear the very inspiring words from all 3 of the other panelists. Everyone obviously recognizing this is going to happen. This isn't an if anymore. This is a when, and recognizing the huge opportunities of the transition to a net zero economy, and making sure that Canada has its rightful place as a leader in it rather than a laggard in it. And Jojo, I just thought that was an amazing story about that facility at Red River College, and I know Mohawk and the other members of the Alliance are just doing great stuff. So thank you. Clara, you mentioned your kids had never driven a gas car. So this is great. My university age kids have never driven a car, period. So, you know, that's another sign of the times, frankly, in terms of urbanization and public transit and everything. So amazing how the culture is changing before our eyes. So very encouraging. Now, this is, of course, for me as a labor economist, this is a very exciting time, a very challenging time, but lots of opportunities for us. And there is a silver lining in the pandemic, despite the horrible harm and suffering that it's caused, in terms of forcing us to wake up and smell the cappuccino, if you like, about where the future jobs and opportunities are going to come from. And all of our challenges about employment transitions and skills and so on now, and for some years to come, are going to be phrased in the context of the pandemic and what it's meant for our labor market. This has just been, you know, obviously a dramatic shock to our labor market, the most dramatic shock to our labor market since the 1930s. And unfortunately, we're not done yet. We've got a few months of hard slogging ahead of us. What started out as the supply shock with shutting down industries that had to be closed for health reasons, the face-to-face hands-on industries like retail and hospitality, entertainment, a lot of transportation, et cetera. And that's still happening, of course, with the new shutdowns in this terrible third wave. It's also kind of merged into a bigger demand side recession. And even though we've won back a fair share of the jobs that were lost in the initial months of the pandemic, we're still well below where we need to be. And just the difference from where we were to where we are today in and of itself constitutes the biggest economic downturn since World War II. So it feels better economically and employment-wise than it did last May, but we're still in the soup. And the reality is that even if the vaccines were all out tomorrow and everyone took them and they worked, luckily we think they do work, which is great. We'd still have a major problem ahead of us. I think it will be years for us to rebuild the quantity of work in Canada's economy. Just getting the vaccines in people's arms isn't going to cause us to automatically snap back to where we need to be. There's still issues about spending power, about consumer confidence, about business confidence, about investment, about exports that have to be resolved. And government is going to have to play the leading role in what I've called a kind of a national reconstruction plan for some years. And I'm hoping that the federal budget will again reaffirm the government's recognition of the need for that type of leadership to get the macroeconomic ball rolling. Government's the only part of our economy that has the financial resources and the authority and the ability to act on a national level to get the overall macroeconomic momentum reconstructed or rebuilt. And as part of that, of course, we need to be thinking about the quality of our economy and addressing issues like the energy transition. The pandemic, of course, in economic terms, has in a way highlighted and accelerated the energy transition. That's obvious. We saw a big shock in energy markets and energy prices earlier in the pandemic, some recovery since then, but clearly this episode, this year, has highlighted that fossil fuel industries are never again going to be an engine of growth for Canada's economy. There are other engines of growth that are out there, and we might as well seize those and then think about how we make the transition from an economy that was traditionally led by resources of various kinds. Fossil fuels really is just the latest wave in a whole series of staples or resource-led economic waves in Canada's history, and start thinking about how we can move to something more diversified, more value-added, and of course, more sustainable. We have done some work on the nature of the labor market transitions that will be associated with the changing energy makeup of Canada's economy, and I'll send around in the chat a link to the report that we did on this subject. We studied in detail where Canadians work in fossil fuel industries now, what are the prospects for those jobs over the coming decades as the transition occurs. It's not going to happen overnight, but as Clara said, we can't waste time here. We've got to be moving as quickly as we can. And in a way found some surprising findings, I think, given the common tone of debate and discourse that we've had in Canada, where we've got, a certain segment of business leadership and political leadership, which argues that we are completely dependent on fossil fuel industries, and if we move away from them, we'll suffer mass job losses and mass economic losses. And I think quite to the contrary, our research has found some surprising findings. One is that the size of the required transition is smaller than is often argued by some with vested interests in trying to retain or continue to subsidize the fossil fuel sector. We found that less than 1% of Canadian employed people have a direct position in fossil fuel production and distribution systems. Of course, they're not evenly spread across the country. If they were, this wouldn't even be an issue. But because of the regional concentration in fossil fuel producing regions, like Alberta in particular, where 7% of employed people have direct jobs in fossil fuels, that makes it a lot more challenging there and a lot more complicated for our federation, but still manageable. We also showed that most of the work in these employment transitions over time is achieved not by sort of the direct motion, if you like, of someone from a fossil fuel job to a renewable energy job. It's often phrased in terms of somebody is going to move from, being a roughneck on an oil well to producing windmills in a windmill factory. And connecting the dots in that kind of simplistic way is not actually how the labor market works. And there's a huge range of ongoing dynamic forces that allow us to adjust to changes in the economy quite effectively and quite in a very multidimensional way. Remember, less than 1% of employed people work in fossil fuels. There are jobs in renewable energy systems, and we're talking about some of those today, electric vehicles in particular, but that is also about 1% of the economy, of the labor market. So why would we limit ourselves to just taking that 1% and trying to shift it over to this 1%? There's a whole other 98% of the labor market that is going to be a key part of the transitions that are involved. And very few of the transitions are actually going to involve someone doing an old fossil fuel job and moving them into a new renewable job. Most of the work, if you like, or the heavy lifting in the transition is going to be associated with the normal adjustments and flows that happen in our labor market all the time. People joining the labor market, people leaving the labor market, people retiring, people changing jobs, changing careers, and so on. Think about it. In Canada today, about 20% of employed Canadians have been in their job for less than a year. So that just gives you a quick input of how flexible and how dynamic the labor market is all the time. And in this context, the transition starts to take on a different idea. If we can enlist those regular forces of labor market adjustment over time, then we can facilitate this transition very smoothly, I think, if we give proper planning, proper notice, proper support for all of the workers involved, both those who will be leaving non-renewable jobs in fossil fuels and related industries, leaving them for various reasons, including just because they got old and retired. In fact, that's how most of those jobs are going to disappear. And then the new positions that are opening up in new industries like electric vehicles that we're talking about today. If we plan that whole transition over, say, a 20-year period, we could actually phase out all of those direct jobs in fossil fuel industries by shifting about 8,000 jobs per year into another part of the labor market. And 8,000 jobs in the context of Canada's national economy is very small. That's what the economy would normally create in 10 days. So phrased in that terms, in that context of a sort of long run gradual transition where we're enlisting all of those forces of adjustment, you could do it absolutely without destroying people's livelihoods, without disrupting communities, and so on. And there's lots of international examples of planned, gradual, supported, long-term transitions that have been immensely successful in places like Germany, Spain, Netherlands. Ontario is a great example when they phased out coal-fired electricity in a planned way. Clara might have been part of that whole process without a single involuntary layoff, all through transitions, including subsidized early retirements and so on. So this absolutely can be done, and our report with the link that I sent around has got a list of best practices for how it can happen. And in general, it's not a question of taking someone, from a non-renewable job and moving them into a renewable job. On the other hand, there are cases where the dots can be connected that easily, and electric vehicles is one of them. So, in a way, this is low-hanging fruit for us. In terms of thinking about the overall labor market transition. We make cars in Canada. We're a leading automotive producer in the world. We've got a tremendous reputation for productivity, skills, and quality. And we can absolutely make electric vehicles. In fact, it's already happening, of course. And Clara mentioned the big investments being made in Canadian electric vehicle production by Ford and GM and Fiat Chrysler. My former union, Unifor, was a big part of that process in terms of getting ahead of the curve and negotiating what the future of those jobs are going to look like, rather than sticking your head in the sand and hoping that nothing ever changes. That strategy doesn't work very well, very often. We've thought a little bit about the skills dimension of that transition from producing conventional internal combustion vehicles to electric vehicles. There are some skills issues associated with them. They are not overwhelming issues. For example, the assembly line manufacturing process for an electric vehicle is not that different than for an internal combustion engine, and there will be some new skills and some new practices that have to be handled, is particularly around new materials, handling things like lithium and the material handling related to the batteries, some issues around bonding and welding technologies and so on. But those are absolutely doable. And to tell you the truth, the factories are facing bigger challenges than that one in terms of work organization and skills and technology. Things like Industry 4.0 and the automation and robotization, and by the way, a continued effort by the companies involved to try and cheapen and outsource as much of the skilled work in those factories as possible. And to be frank, some of them are going to try to use the transition to electric vehicles as an excuse to outsource all the work and break down traditional skills requirements and so on. And we have to guard against that. We have to make sure that the skills in the new generation of auto production are high quality, regulated, held to the highest account, not cheapened and outsourced. Also, the bigger issue, frankly, in vehicle manufacturing is to make sure that we defend a proportional Canadian footprint in the industry. Our industry is important, but it's not as big as it used to be. And there's still pressures around globalization and companies involved wanting to move production to cheaper locations that frankly pose a bigger threat to our industry than the electrification process. And I do think there's some great opportunities, not just to facilitate the transition to electric vehicle manufacturing of the companies that are already here, but to think about new companies that could be brought to Canada or even built in Canada. Canada has a great auto parts producer, Magna, one of the biggest in the world. It is capable of manufacturing complete vehicles. In fact, it does that in Europe. They would be a great contract manufacturer to produce electric vehicles for Apple or some other brand name that wants to do it, or perhaps to do it in their own name. And government should be right in there with lots of support and co-investments and other support to make those things happen. The skills challenge will be bigger in the auto parts side of it than in the vehicle manufacturing part of it. And there are more jobs involved in parts supplies than there is in final manufacturing. And that's where you're going to have entire factories that change from producing, engines and transmissions to producing batteries and related systems. So I think that challenge will be more significant, and both government and the employers, so the OEMs and the colleges, have to be right there in the middle of making sure that we preserve as many capacities in Canada as we can, that the young generation of auto parts workers is getting the skills and support that they need. And I think colleges are vastly overlooked as a vital part of our labor market infrastructure in Canada. They don't get the attention or the money that colleges need. And this transition is just one example of why we need colleges. We need colleges to be well funded, to be stable, to be cutting edge, as we saw with the Red River facility. And in partnership with government and industry and unions, they can absolutely make the best of this opportunity that's ahead of us. I'm generally optimistic, and after this panel today, I'm more optimistic than ever about what opportunities are lying ahead. So thanks for all that you're doing.
Well, that was fantastic, Jim. Thank you very much. I think you can count yourself appointed as honorary economist to C2R2 based on those remarks. That was great, and particularly good that you could tie in the complementary roles of labour unions, the government, of course, and the educational sector, the colleges, because this can only work given the dynamism of the labour market that you've described, if we're all pulling in the same direction. So many thanks indeed for reinforcing for us that important systemic question, how do we make sure all the different parts that make for a vibrant economy work together, so we avoid breakdowns in the supply of qualified labour, and we guard against the erosion of standards, whether that's employment standards or safety standards or anything else, because we're going to outsource everything. All those things are real and present dangers, and hopefully in Canada we can avoid the downsides of the way markets sometimes operate, and we instead put in place the high standards and the opportunities for young people and not so young people as they pursue their careers in all of these different areas of the greener economy. So many thanks, Jim. So now we're at the plenary part of the discussion. And so I'd encourage participants to add their questions into the Q&A space, which you'll find at the bottom of the screen. And if you want to access Jim's link that he very kindly provided, that's in the answered section. But maybe I'll use facilitator's privilege here and kick things off for all of our panelists and ask you to think a little bit about the way Canada works. Because of course, Canada has not yet covered itself in glory in terms of meeting its greenhouse gas emissions challenges, although we hope that changes. And sometimes people think it's difficult to get things done in Canada because we're all so nice to each other, and then we defer to the provinces, or we defer to whichever set of vested interests is making the most noise from one week to the next. Any of our panelists can answer this, and I'd encourage you to all just unmute yourselves as fast as you can. Do you think we can get our act together on this transition? Do you think the 1 million new jobs that the government talks about, the unprecedented investment in skills, do you think we can pull that off, given the size and the complexity of the challenge?
Well, David, I'll carry on with my rabidly optimistic view of the world that I just finished speaking about. I absolutely think we can, and in discussing this over the last few months, I've used a historical analogy. I think about World War II and the National Reconstruction Plan, if you like, effort that came at the end of World War II. That was another time when we faced an immense national challenge where we threw all the resources that we could into it. Nobody cared about the deficit when we were fighting the Nazis. We knew we had to do this, and we had to do it with everything that we could. And we went from chronic depression to full employment almost overnight. And at the end of the war, in fact, before the end of the war, the government appointed a Department of National Reconstruction and put C.D. Howe, one of our most legendary civil servants, well, I guess he was a politician at that point, in charge of planning a reconstruction strategy that involved more ambition, more investment, more infrastructure, more skills, more social benefits, and we entered a period of unprecedented growth and inclusion, really. And I think we can do the same thing. And I'm encouraged by the government's indication that it has an eye on a longer run reconstruction. It's not just trying to get through the next few hard months. We've got some money already set aside in the budget for the sorts of investments that are going to be required, including in building new industries like EV and enhancing our skills capacity. So there will be debate over it. We've already seen debate. We've already heard some of the same voices saying government must get out of the way and let the private sector do it all and focus on reducing the deficit. And that would be an enormous mistake. And I frankly don't think most Canadians after this last year are going to believe it, because they understand, through experience, that government's role in protecting us and leading us through this crisis is absolutely vital. So there's my optimistic take on your question.
Thank you, Jim. John.
Yeah, and David, what I might offer to this is a little bit of a challenge here first. I would say from my vantage point here at Siemens, I've had the opportunity to watch countries like China, countries like Norway, Germany, although it had a slow start, how it sped up, go through this transition. So first, it is possible. And it is possible to drastically accelerate the trend for electrifying transport. Second, it's critical. And I hope that it is clear that the world is changing. And oftentimes when we look at this, it's looked at in the microcosm of our local governments. But what we have to recognize is that there is a worldwide multi-industry transformation that is happening right now. And so when we start to look at the imperative that's behind that, it's quite sharp, right? The failure to react has been met in history many times with very difficult consequences. Now, that being the case, I'm very optimistic for Canada, and I'm very, very excited by what I see. I look at the base of different vehicle manufacturers. We look at some of those previous presentations in clean energy supply, and there are many elements that are in a great position to go scale against. You know, I oftentimes have marveled at organizations like Qtric up in Canada that are looking at ways of innovating the very business models that are associated with electrifying transport, and it's exciting. But the challenge is still there, and it's not a given.
Thank you, John. That's, again, a great point you made about comparing with what's going on internationally and the fact we can't hang around on this. There's a couple of questions come in, and I think the first one, again, applies to most of our panelists, but I think I might start with Clara in answering this one. So our questioner says, if electric vehicles require fewer parts, especially with the lack of complex engines and parts that don't wear out as often, such as brakes due to regenerative braking, is the parts industry and the service repair industry as a whole facing an inevitable permanent contraction? So does this ever come up, Clara, in your world about some of the unintended consequences, perhaps, in certain parts of the labour market of this transition to electric vehicles? And then I guess probably other panelists will also have a perspective on that as well. But let me come to you first, Clara.
Yes, it comes up quite often. Certainly you hear it as a reason or as a potential reason why some dealerships may not embrace EVs. It's never proven as the reason, but there's a suspicion amongst EV supporters that, you know, that dealerships shy away from them because there's going to be a lot less service, and that's where a lot of the money is. I don't really think that's the case. I think most of the reason, if at all, dealerships struggle to promote EVs is they just don't have any. You know, our research has shown that if the dealership has some on the lot, they're pretty good about trying to sell them. But of course, if they don't, they're going to try to sell something they have. And if you're in sales, that's the job, to sell what you have. And you can't really blame those folks for trying to sell the gas cars they have on the lot. So we have to help with the supply. But on the parts, definitely the folks in the aftermarket are concerned about what will happen. Now, you know, there'll be gas vehicles around for quite some time, especially used ones. So it's not anything that is urgent, but certainly that's a reality. There are servicing requirements, but they're more computer than car. So it's a different skill set, but there'll still be skills needed. And of course, you're still swapping tires, and there's certain things that don't change. But for the most part, they say it's a, you know, really orders of magnitude less. And I can say that I've experienced that myself, having driven EVs now for 10 years and have never yet had to have any vehicle I've owned serviced even once, like at all. So you don't have to visit anybody. So it's fantastic for the driver, but maybe less fantastic for the service provider.
Thanks, Clara. And I guess, Jim, you would probably argue that this is part of the give and take, right? That there'll be certain things that contract slightly over time, certain things that may expand slightly.
Yeah, certainly. And, you know, on the one hand, you could say this is a challenge, the fact that electric vehicles are more reliable and require less service and break down less often. Is that a bad thing? You can't possibly argue that that's a bad thing. There's nothing else in our lives where we'd say, gosh, I wish they broke down more often so that we could hire people to fix them. So obviously there is going to be issues at the dealership level and the maintenance end of things. On the other hand, you know, if consumers end up saving money, and Clara has proven that they will, then they're going to spend money on other things that are going to have jobs associated. And it isn't to be, you know, it isn't to be blithe about the transitions and what they mean for the individuals involved. But from a macroeconomic perspective, this is not an issue, or this is a good thing, not a bad thing. And as long as we're supporting people with skills, and in the context of an overall, you know, very expansive macroeconomic plan. You know, we have to make sure that people are spending money and that those jobs are going to be created in other places. Then, you know, honestly, in some ways, we aren't even going to notice these transitions as they occur.
Yeah, and one thing I would add on top of that, that sometimes isn't in the conversation, is we see the loss of the spare parts of the vehicle, and we see the risk to oil and gas, right? I mean, these are just very present, realistic aspects of the transition. But when we look across the entire energy spectrum, we also have to realize that there is a growth in the electrical industry, and that those are local jobs at utilities, power generation, local solar contractors. I mean, there's an entire ecosystem that moves beyond just the vehicle to the entire value stream that's created. And it's a local energy supply. You know, it very oftentimes, the power is not generated across the country or internationally, it's generated locally. And with the powerful transition to clean power, that point is further emphasized. So I would just encourage also looking at that even broader transition that happens in the marketplace, and the very exciting premise that as electric vehicles are increasing, we also find a higher ability to sustain renewable energy on the grid. We find that we can get the grid more resilient and more stable. And in many cases, there's also the need for local jobs to enable that infrastructure at the next scale.
Great points, John, thank you. And another question has come up that I think I'll come to you to start with, John, but again, other panelists will be invited to chip in their perspectives as well. And this is about the potential for the misuse of monopoly powers in the vehicle repair market. So our questioner says, one area of concern I personally have with the growth of EVs is to what degree will private industry or manufacturers utilize proprietary charging networks and or monopolize the vehicle repair market? Do our panelists have any insights into techniques that the Government of Canada can employ to protect consumer rights to repair and incentivize public, universally available charging networks? So again, this speaks to the role of government in putting on infrastructure that everyone can benefit from equally across the country. But John, please address that, and then we'll open it up to the panelists.
Absolutely, man. That is, boy, that's one that resonates with me very deeply as a 10-year EV driver. And to be very blunt, it is something that's unique to the North American market when I compare it to the rest of the world. North America has had a challenge in its first decade, meaning Canada and the United States, that there has been the build out of many proprietary systems that are not open standards based, that are not open and accessible. And so one of the key elements that I'll say we advocate for as Siemens, as just one player in this amazing transition, is to ensure that as we are funding this infrastructure build out, that the infrastructure is open and accessible. And it means things like when you want to use charging infrastructure, you better be able to pull out a credit card and pay for it, and it better not be tied to proprietary systems. And that when that infrastructure is deployed, it works across the different vehicle types in an open way so that they can be enabled. So these are real risks, and these are things where if there is no adequate measures put in place, we have found many incidences, be it proprietary standards from very progressive manufacturers or clever local techniques to transition government funds to private interest. These things can develop, and it's important that we get ahead of them.
Jojo.
Yeah, one other thing to add to what John mentioned is I think Canada can play a crucial role in standardization of charging infrastructure. I know that there has been for a while now a couple of rapid charging standards, and it's a divide. It's a charging infrastructure standards that's being used by different automakers. If Canada can, institute a standardization of charging infrastructure, then that should avoid the monopoly in terms of how to use those infrastructures. Again, government can play a big role and should play a big role in terms of implementing that.
And David, I'd just like to add that unfortunately they're not doing that because they have their funding round, third round out as we speak, and their proprietary systems being installed, and they're funded equally to any other. And certainly this issue of beta versus VHS kind of systems still exists, and we haven't kind of settled on the one. And then of course Tesla has its own, and so we're going to have this problem for quite some time because we're continuing to fund sort of this bit of a smorgasbord of solutions.
Yeah, so that is a real problem potentially, but maybe it's a topic we can pick up in our conversations with ministers and others as we move forward in all of this, because we cannot afford for competition to stand in the way of a public good, which clearly the world and Canada needs. So sadly, we're out of time for our panel discussion, but I think we could have easily continued for much longer, and hopefully we'll get another opportunity to bring our four amazing panelists together for a thoughtful interaction in the future, maybe when C2R2 is a bit further down the line and we're talking about labour market gaps and opportunities and so on. So please, let's all join together in giving our panelists a virtual round of applause for those of you that are on video so they can see that. And it really has been a very rich and powerful conversation, and my personal thanks, and thanks on behalf of C2R2 and our hosts, Red River College, for such fantastic contributions. Thank you so much. At this point, I'm going to draw things to a close and just note that, as I mentioned earlier, this is the first of a series of seminars, and I think we may have a final slide to show what is to come. If not, then if you registered for this event, you will be sent information about future events, and we would encourage you all to share your experience with this event. Obviously, it's recorded, so it will become publicly available and reach a much bigger audience, and the same will apply to all of our future events. At this point, I'm going to again note that we have had fantastic political support for C2R2 from a number of ministers and opinion formers in Ottawa and across the country. And one of our most enthusiastic supporters has been Catherine McKenna, who of course is Minister for Infrastructure and Communities and a real dynamo on the climate agenda. So I'm going to say thank you again to all of our panelists, to all of you who've attended today. Please tell your friends about this series, and I'm going to sign off and hand over to Catherine McKenna, who's recorded a video for C2R2 and this webinar series, especially for us. So over to Catherine McKenna, and we'll see you all again soon, I hope.
Hi, bonjour. It's great to see that the Canadian Colleges for Resilient Recovery is growing and gaining momentum. I had the chance to first address your group during your inaugural meeting last September. At that time, there were 8 partner colleges involved. It's great to see that the coalition has now grown to 16 institutions covering the country from coast to coast to coast. I look forward to seeing the results of your important work as you continue to make progress. One of the goals for your coalition has been to engage and bring people together from across Canada. Through this webinar, you have the ability to bridge our country's huge geography and engage in dialogue about climate action, net zero emissions, and best practices in support of a resilient recovery in Canada. What could be more important? Keep focusing on a small carbon footprint and on big ideas. I'm joining you today as the Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, welcoming you to the first webinar in what I know will be a provocative and practical series. Today, you're exploring the strategies, challenges, and workforce issues that are facing Canada in our transition to sustainable zero-emissions transportation on our roads. This industry and this pivotal transformation will play a critical role in our resilient recovery. Helping communities invest in zero-emission transportation options ensures cleaner air for our kids, creates jobs, and supports Canadian manufacturing. This is a perfect kickoff for your webinar series. You have a great engaged panel of industry and sustainable leaders joining you. I really encourage you to turn this discussion and the power of collaboration into tangible outcomes for your own communities and for all of Canada. The partners in Canadian Colleges for Resilient Recovery are in a position to help Canada build back better. Through applied research at colleges, you can help shape the solutions for resilient recovery. And through your internationally recognized faculty and facilities, you can train the workforce that we need to build that resilient recovery. Together, through events like this, we can shape the conversation and plan a better path forward. And together, we can create a stronger, more resilient recovery for all Canadians. I look forward to speaking with you again soon. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you to Catherine and to all of you again, and we'll see you all again soon. Take care.